Johnson is here, Mr. President. Johnson is here. Can you hear me in the Bollinger Room?
Yes, we can, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's now 9:31 a.m. Today's date is April 5th, 2022. It is the time for our regularly scheduled business meeting. Would the other commissioners join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands. Thank you, commissioners. I would note for the record that we have quorum today. Vice President Johnson is participating remotely. Commissioners O'Donnell, Panocci, myself, and Fielder are present in the Bollinger Room. This is now the time and place for public comment. Do we have any public comment this morning from in the room? Seeing none, is there any public comment online? Seeing none. All right. There are no changes to the agenda this morning. So we will move to our action items. Action item number 1 is approval of the commission minutes for the week of March 14, 2022. Is there a motion? Commissioner Panocci has moved to approve the minutes for the week of March 14th, 2022. Is there a second?
Second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. President.
Motion has been seconded. Discussion or changes to the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of Commissioner Pinocchi's motion to adopt the minutes for the week of March 14, 2022 as written, signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Minutes are adopted. Action item number 2 is a request for out-of-state staff travel. Will.
Morning, Mr. President, Commissioners. Staff requests approval for Dan Stusek to travel to San Diego, California, May 1st through the 4th, 2022, to attend the Spring 2022 Joint CREPC YRAB Spring Meeting. Staff recommends approval, Mr. President.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Move to accept.
I will second. Discussion. Commissioner Fielder.
Forgive me for asking, but what are the acronyms for and the purpose of the meeting?
CREPC is the Committee on Regional Electric Power Cooperation. YRAB is the Western Interconnection Regional Advisory Body. And there is an agenda, but I don't have it in front of me, so I'll have to get back to you on the purpose of the meeting.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I think the names help explain it for me, so that's fine.
Additional discussion, questions? We have an
Mr.
estimate.
President.
Yes, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just, for the benefit of the group, the CREPC YRAB meeting is one of those real staples in terms of Western regional transmission and reliability. And this is a tremendous opportunity for Mr. Stusek to start getting to know some of the players in that arena that he'll be dealing with on a regular basis going forward, Mr. President. So I think it's genuinely an investment in his ability to be effective in his position.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I would agree with that sentiment and statement. I do have a question for you. Will, do we have an estimated cost?
We do, Mr. President, approximately $1,200.
Okay, thank you, Will. Additional discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in the favor of the motion to approve the travel signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries. Travel is approved. All right, that concludes our action items. Let's move to work session.
Mr. President, I've got a couple other out-of-state travel.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Will. Go ahead.
So staff requests approval for Joel Tierney, Sam Harworth, and John Torski to travel to Clark County, Nevada, May 2nd through the 6th, 2022, to attend the Western Region Annual Meeting of the National Association of Pipeline Safety Representatives. Our participation is mandatory here as part of our requirements under the PHMSA grant program. This travel is expected to cost approximately $4,000 and it will be funded out of the pipeline safety grant.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
I move to accept,
and I will second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I wonder about the benefit to this commission of having people go to a conference in Clark County, Nevada, otherwise known as Las Vegas, because what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. So how's it going to benefit us? Thank you.
I presume you're not asking for comment on that question.
That's correct.
Additional discussion, questions? Commissioner Pinocchi would like to go. Additional discussion? All right. Seeing no discussions or questions, all those in favor of the motion to approve the travel, did we do a motion?
Yes.
Yes. All those in favor of approving the motion to travel signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries. Is there more travel requests?
Excuse me, what are the dates of that travel for those people?
That one was May 2nd through the 6th.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr. Vice President?
thank you. I don't know if it came through or not. I got cut off from my connection just as we were voting on the first travel request. I wanted to make sure that the record showed that I voted aye on that request.
All right, very good.
And one more, Mr. President, staff requests approval for Sam Harworth to travel to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, July 18th through the 22nd, 2022, to attend technical qualifications training conducted by PHMSA on gas integrity management protocols. That out-of-state travel is expected to cost approximately $1,800 and will also be funded out of the pipeline safety grant.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell, is
Move to accept, Mr. Chairman.
there a second? Commissioner Pinoche is seconded. Discussion or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve travel signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Any additional ones?
That's all, Mr. President.
Okay. All right, now let's move into our work session. Work session item number 1 is docket 2022.02.017. This is commission initiated. This deals with House Bill 576 implementation. We're here to discuss approving draft notice of repeal to effectuate the repeal of the Montana Renewable Power Product and Rural Economic Development Act and associated commission regulations. Ms. Gobert.
Good morning, Commissioners. On February 11th, the Montana Secretary of State's office issued a notice of public hearing on the proposed repeal of ARM 38.5.8301 and 8302 pertaining to Montana's Renewable Energy Resource Standard. On March 7th, the Commission held a public hearing to receive public comment on the proposal and established a March 14th deadline to submit written comments on the proposal. The Commission did not receive any comments either in support or opposition to the proposal. Staff recommends the Commission approve the attached notice of repeal. Thank you.
Is there a motion? Mr. Fielder?
Mr. President, in accordance with House Bill 576, it was enacted by the legislature and signed into law. I move that the commission approve the draft notice of repeal to effectuate the repeal of the Montana Renewable Power Product and Rural Economic Development Act and relevant commission regulations.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner O'Donnell is seconded. Discussion?
Mr. President,
Commissioner Fielder?
I just note that there were no public comment either for or against. It seems like a very straightforward issue. I think it was dealt with at the legislature and has gone through substantive public process in that respect. So I think we're on good ground to go ahead and repeal the related regulations to the law that's been repealed.
Thank you, Commissioner Fielder. Additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Commissioner Fielder's motion signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Haley.
Mr. President, may I make a comment on that? Just to thank the staff for being on top of this. My layman's view is that there are a whole bunch of regulations in existence in various different places that regulate things that are no longer law. It's good that we clean that up. So I appreciate the staff being right on top of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. All right, let's move to work session item number 2. This is docket 2021.04.053. This is commission initiated procedural rulemaking. We're here to discuss the proposed new rule on intervention and to consider approving the notice of proposed rulemaking. Mr. Hamilton.
Good morning, Mr. President and Commissioners. The work session request is perhaps poorly described because at this point, we don't have a formal notice of proposed rulemaking. What we have is a continuation of the process that the commission started back last year of reviewing its procedural rules, examining ones that are out of date or clunky, and looking at ways that they can be improved and updated. You'll recall that last year, the intervention rules were two of the rules that the commission staff recommended for possible revision as part of an initial batch of changes to our procedural rules. Parties opposed the recommendation that staff had put together there, so the commission did not adopt that. It removed that from the package that was ultimately approved and adopted as final rules. In consultation with the president, legal staff has continued to work on ways that we could improve our intervention rules. What you have before you right now is not a notice of proposed rulemaking that we would hope to submit to the Secretary of State, but rather an outline of what the rule could be that we would circulate to interested parties, the frequent flyers that appear before the commission for their informal comment. To be clear, I don't think it's necessary at this stage to have a roundtable on the intervention rule. This would be informal rulemaking in the sense that we circulate it and we receive feedback before presenting to you an actual notice of proposed rulemaking that would be published in the Secretary of State's Administrative Register. The general theme of the draft intervention rule before you is to simplify the process. It's what I like to view as a quality of life improvement, where we can avoid having to specifically grant intervention when, for example, the MCC files a timely petition for intervention. Since they have a statutory right to participate in commission proceedings, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense from staff's perspective to require a separate grant of that intervention. It's required by statute. Likewise, if parties do not oppose the intervention of parties in a proceeding, it also becomes a formality, a rote exercise in order to grant that intervention. So under the framework outlined in the draft intervention rule before you, we would be looking at narrowing the scope of when intervention must be expressly granted to those instances when the petition for intervention is late or when it is opposed. Of course, it's still important for the commission to be able to ascertain the issues the parties intend on bringing into the proceeding, and that is described in Part 3 of the draft rule. And it's also important for the commission to be able to limit the scope of an intervener's participation, which is discussed in Part 8 of the proposed rule. Those are both important elements of our existing rules that parties commented on in our last rulemaking, and we want to be sure that we preserve those elements going forward. So at this point, staff's recommendation is to authorize, for the commission to authorize staff to circulate this version of a draft intervention rule, along with some edits that have been noted by commissioners before today's work session. Edits in section 5, for example, to describe that the commission may waive the automatic deem approval of an unopposed motion for intervention. And to also clarify some language in Part 4 about the briefing that's allowed in an objection for intervention. But assuming that staff can make those edits, we would ask for the commission's approval to circulate this to the interested parties so that we can begin an informal process ahead of formal rulemaking on intervention. Be happy to address any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I move the commission authorize staff circulate draft intervention rules as a preliminary proposal to parties that routinely appear before the commission for their review and comment. Is there a second?
Second the motion, Mr. President.
All right, Commissioner Fielder seconded. Discussion, questions, Commissioner O'Donnell.
One thing, perhaps we don't have to delve into this here, but under number 4, so there's an objection and it talks about the process of that. Is the acceptance of that objection, is that done by administratively or by the commission?
Mr. President, Commissioner, if I could ask for just a clarification, acceptance of the objection, meaning once a party has determined they will oppose another party's intervention, they file the objection. Are you talking about the administrative act of
Who decides whether or not that objection is valid and to exclude them?
Gotcha. Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, the commission would decide whether or not to admit. Once we have an opposed motion, it's beyond the scope of what staff can resolve, and it's beyond the scope of what this rule would automatically deem to be approved.
I didn't see that listed here. is the reason I talked about the resolution of that complaint process. Commission.
Yeah, Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, point taken, right? The rule only deems a motion to be approved if there is no objection. So if there is an objection, then the motion remains pending until decided by the commission.
Right.
So.
Additional questions or comments? Commissioner Fielder?
Mr. President, thank you, Lucas, for addressing some of the edits specifically. And I think that any edits that clarify the intention here are fine and in conformance with the motion. So I definitely support the motion and look forward to seeing this move forward and hearing back on staff recommendations after you gather some input.
Vice President Johnson, anything?
No, Mr. President, I am comfortable with staff recommendation.
Okay. Additional discussion? Mr. Hamilton, just a clarification on process moving forward. So as I understand it, once this draft is circulated and we have some informal comment from stakeholders on the proposal, then we would schedule another commission work session to discuss formal notice of amendment. Is that how you envision it?
Mr. President, Commissioners, that's correct. Yeah, the commission would still definitely need to approve any formal notice of proposed rulemaking before that process begins.
Okay, thank you for clarification. Additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of my motion signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. All right, let's move to work session item number 3. This is docket 2020.03.033. This is commission initiated. This is House Bill 467 implementation. We're here to discuss approval of draft amended notice of proposed rulemaking to implement minimum filing requirements for the Montana Energy Impact Assistance Act. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Commissioners, you'll recall that on February 22nd of this year, the commission published its first notice of proposed rulemaking regarding the Montana Energy Impact Assistance Act. That's the bill that would allow securitization of certain costs of decommissioning, remediation, and potentially replacement of assets. The initial notice sparked some considerable interest. In response to that interest, we have made some changes to the proposed rule, which you can see in paragraph 4 of the amended notice before you. The changes that were made in response to those comments are indicated in underline and strike through. The general theme of the changes here are to, one, move away from rate base as the hallmark for the minimum filing requirement and focus more on revenue requirement. Of course, the revenue requirement formula includes an element of rate base, but that is not the full scope of the effect of removing an asset through this securitization process from the revenue requirement. So we want to make sure that the commission, as a matter of the minimum filing for these applications, has that information before it from the outset, since it will be essential to making the final order in the case, which must find that there's a significant benefit to ratepayers under the statute. So changing the focus from rate base to revenue requirement is one important element. Another important element, I should say a contested element as well, is to include in the minimum filing requirement a calculation and description of the effect of a financing order on a utility's supply tracking mechanism. A substantial portion of what ratepayers pay as part of their utility bill is beyond the revenue requirement and is captured instead in that supply cost tracking mechanism. So again, to have a full picture of what the effect of granting the application of granting a financing order would be, staff believes it is important to have a discussion of the effect on the supply cost tracking mechanism. You were here a few weeks ago when we had the public hearing on this particular rulemaking, so you know that there is some initial objection to that proposal. And because we want to provide maximum opportunity for comment, so the commission can make an educated decision when it does make a final rulemaking here, we recommend that the commission issue this amended notice of proposed adoption. And what this does is extend the public comment period through May 10th. Excuse me, that's the deadline for request for accommodation. The deadline for comment under this notice would be May 13th of 2022. So it's an additional month for parties to comment on this proposed changed language. We believe that that shores up the rulemaking process as a legal matter and ensures that the final adoption here will be less prone to legal challenge on the basis of adopting a rule that was never properly noticed in the first place, or better put, an element of a rule that was never properly noticed in the first place. I should also note that this amended notice of proposed adoption does not include the MCC's proposed change to Part 2L of the rule. Staff is still unclear what difference that proposed change would make. We've had some informal discussions with the MCC since the public hearing, and we are not yet at a position where we can recommend that change as well. We will continue to explore that with the MCC and make a final recommendation after the renewed comment period here closes. So with that, staff's recommendation would be to authorize the publication of the amended notice of proposed adoption. With me today for regulatory, Gary Duncan, who can also address any questions you may have.
Mr. Duncan, do you have anything to add at this one time?
Mr. President, commissioners, I might add that the way the rules were originally written, they said they had to estimate the impact of removal of a rate base. Rate base is significantly different than base rates. So that's why we suggested including the revenue requirement information. The rule applies to any utility that wanted to pursue securitization. But I'll just briefly describe, if you look at Northwestern and their CU4 asset, if they were to apply for securitization of that and retire that asset, currently in Northwestern's rates, the revenue requirement for CU4, the last approved, is $67 million a year. That's recovered through the supply rate. Through their electric supply tracker, which is their PCAM. Okay, there's elements in there. Electric supply tracker is not just electric supply cost, it's also includes fuel costs. Okay, so for example, Dave Gates' variable cost is in there for the cost of gas. Their basin, which one's the plant in Butte? God, I can't remember. Anyway, that's in there for the plant for the cost of coal. CU4 variable cost is in the tracker for its variable cost, which is the cost of coal, and that the last approved base cost for that was $23 million a year. So if you look at CU4 currently, what I would consider the base rates that are being charged to customers today for CU4 are the $67 million revenue requirement and the $23 million in coal costs. That the variable piece is the coal cost that can change, according to the load, how much is generated, that can go up or down, which is why it's included as a variable cost. But in my mind, if they were to retire Colstrip, then the thing that would happen coincidentally with that is if Colstrip is shut down, CU4 no longer working, then not only should the revenue requirement costs be removed as a ratepayer responsibility, so should the variable cost of coal costs. And so that was the subject of some discussion at the time. But that's a little more background on that.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I move the commission issue an amended notice of proposed rulemaking to allow an additional comment period on the revisions that were just discussed and that are set forth in the proposed rule. which has been publicly noticed. Is there a second?
Second the motion, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner Fielder. Discussion? Vice Chair Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just very briefly, I think this is one of those situations that it's far better we get things right rather than fast, and I certainly am supportive of the motion, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Hamilton, just doing our diligence here. I believe that the bill sponsor, Representative Hayman, has been notified of our proposed changes and given opportunity to comment.
Mr. President, yes, we exchanged emails about it. At this time, she has no additional comment. Of course, we got a month ahead of us here, so she may change her mind and provide additional comment.
Okay, thank you. Additional comment or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of my motion to issue an amended notice of proposed rulemaking signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay. As a reminder to the commissioners and to the public, we will be having a hearing at 1:30 p.m. today here in the Bollinger Room on docket 2021.08 1.109 Northwestern Energy in the matter of Northwestern Energy's request for partial waiver of administrative and tariff rules concerning in-person notice. And then our next commission business meeting will be Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. Seeing no further business to come before the commission, I adjourn. The time is now 10 a.m. and I adjourn today's business meeting.